Which celebrity went on the fastest, hardest and most destructive downward spiral from their peak? Kurt Cobain. Formed Nirvana in '87, and went from playing record store gigs and dive bars in the late '80s to putting out Nevermind*, a record that knocked Michael Jackson out of the #1 spot in Jan of '92. Back then, something like that was unheard of and considered impossible in the industry. For the next couple of years, Nirvana were arguably one of the biggest and most popular rock bands in the world, but Cobain was already thinking of ways to essentially sabotage the band's popularity because he was so uncomfortable with how famous they got while dealing with his own inner demons and drug addiction. They performed at the Reading Festival in '92 in what many consider one of the great live rock performances of all time. Put out their second major studio album, In Utero**, in February of '93, that went to #1 instantly despite the record company originally thinking it was unreleasable, and some major retailers refusing to sell it due to the album art and the song, Rape Me. Performed their iconic MTV Unplugged set in November of '93, despite Cobain being in the heavy throes of heroin addiction and them not knowing if he'd be able to perform until showtime. In March of '94 he intentionally odded in Rome while on a European tour. Came back home, went to rehab for a couple of days, hopped the fence, and a week later he blew his head off with a shotgun. Nirvana has sold over 75 million records worldwide despite only being a band for less than 7 years, and only releasing essentially 2 major label albums, Nevermind and In Utero, 1 indie album, Bleach, 1 album of B-sides, Incesticide, the MTV Unplugged album and a Greatest Hits album, Nirvana. I'd say that qualifies as a pretty destructive downward spiral, especially considering their ascent was so rapid as well. That's so tragic. Although they were only around for such a short time, they sure made a mark on the music industry. I guess if you can't stand the heat, get out of the rock star kitchen. I would have to say Whitney Houston. I suspect many people here were either not alive or too young to remember how insanely big Houston was. She was literally the biggest female artist in the world and one of the biggest artists, and this was before social media. She holds the record for having 7 consecutive #1 singles on the Billboard Top 100, record sales of over 200 million, a host of awards including 28 Guinness World Records. The only other artist that could stand shoulder to shoulder with Whitney in regards to success would be Michael Jackson. However, between 2000 to 2005 her entire career and life completely disintegrated. Her marriage to Bobby Brown, her addiction to crack, the car crash that was her own reality TV show utterly destroyed her career. She attempted a comeback in 2009-10 by doing a world tour, but it was painful to watch to say the least. She was unable to hit high notes, she no longer had the range she had, many performances were cancelled, I think it was one in Australia which was an utter car crash. She made the audience wait for hours, and when she did appear she simply couldn't sing. Pretty much everyone booed her and she GTFO in a very short time. The general consensus was her tour was a major flop. She tried to come back a couple times afterwards, but she never got even close to her former glory. I have never seen somebody who arguably was the world's biggest artist fall so hard and fast as Whitney Houston. It's so true, Whitney Houston had one of the most successful careers of all time, and it's so heartbreaking to see that it all seemed to come tumbling down so quickly. I guess if you're gonna have a major flop, it's best to do it on a world tour where the whole world can witness it. Still, her music and legacy will live forever, and that's really the only thing that matters. I know it's a bit of a niche, but Conor McGregor. He wasn't everyone's superstar. Ask people from Ireland and they'll tell you they hate his guts. Still, while he was a controversial and cantankerous figure, he was mostly inoffensive on his meteoric rise. Blew through contenders like paper, destroyed the greatest featherweight ever with one punch, and his ego got out of control. He got brought back down to earth by Nate Diaz, adjusted his approach, and went up a division to dethrone the lightweight champ. First simultaneous double champion, Conormania was in. Everyone was raving about him. Highest selling PPV star in MMA, celebrity appearances. If you thought of combat sports from 2015 to 2017, you thought of the name Conor McGregor. All that box office success drove him to a matchup with Floyd Mayweather. Months of back and forth trash talk as Conor was known for, but as the talk progressed it felt like Conor was losing a step. It seemed like all the wit and charm he had on the rise was eroding. Then came the fight, and it was the usual spectacle of a Conor performance, but Floyd destroyed his aura of being untouchable. At the same time, Conor got exactly what he always dreamed of: more money than any human should have. This money led to a sense of invincibility. He flew halfway around the world to throw a dolly at the bus of his rival Khabib with a pack of Irish gangsters. The glass from the window the dolly smashed injured several fighters in that bus. He was arrested, but got off easy. Money. The Khabib fight was the biggest in his career. 2 years of layoff, returning to face an unstoppable juggernaut. The press conferences were packed with vitriol and pure bile rather than the typical tongue-in-cheek charm. It was uncharacteristic, or rather, it was the mask coming off at last. He got humiliated badly, and everything went wild. Cocaine. Sexual assault scandals, whether true or not. Alcohol. He started his own whiskey brand. Apparently it's garbage, but don't take it from me. Take it from the old man he sucker punched in a bar for refusing to drink it. Another 2 years off, he comes back against Donald Cerrone, someone well below his level and everyone knows it. He's surprisingly mild-mannered and kind in the lead up to the fight. It's unclear if this is the new him, the real him, or another mask. He seems to be back on track. Another year off. Thanks, COVID. He makes a cordial fight offer to former opponent Dustin Poirier, world-class good guy of the sport. The lead up to their rematch is mild and gentlemanly as befitting a seemingly reformed McGregor and a laid-back Louisiana slugger. It's an electrifying rematch regardless, and the last time we ever see this side of him again. He gets humiliated again. Badly. In the aftermath, he's cordial, but in the lead up to the rubber match something snaps. Cocaine. Anxiety. Alcohol. Something goes wrong and goes wrong badly because he returns with an uncharacteristic, substance-less viciousness. He starts involving Dustin's family in dirty, charmless ways. Attacks him at the press conference. He can't get his charm going because it's been replaced with coke and cash. The fight itself ends with McGregor on the ground, his legs snapped in two, screaming obscenities at Dustin and promising that he and his family will die in their sleep. He uses his post-fight interview to rant about how it's not over and he'll still batter Dustin in the parking lot, on one leg. There's nothing left of the young Irish kid who made it big. Now there's just a bitter laughingstock ranting on the floor about another man's wife and leaving the sport that made him famous behind on a stretcher. It's really disheartening to see how far Conor McGregor has come, or rather, not come. If you're enjoying the video, please consider donating to our Patreon, to get your very own comment in a video. Or try joining our Discord. Aaron Hernandez. Played tight end for the New England Patriots. Fresh off a new contract. Killed his friend, found guilty, then took his own life during the appeal. The Hollywood of yesteryear had more than its fair share of career implosions such as Fatty Arbuckle and Harry Langdon, but few can match Wallace Reed. Described as the screen's most perfect lover, he was an all-round athlete and musician who wanted to move from theater to film. He approached Vitagraph Studios with a story hoping he could direct it, but the studio jumped on the opportunity to cast the 6-foot blue-eyed Reed as a matinee idol. By 1922, he had appeared in nearly 200 pictures and even tried out for the Indy 500. Reed was hiding a secret, however. In 1919, he had been involved in a train wreck and was prescribed morphine for his injuries. As the pressure of stardom grew, he rapidly became addicted, regularly spending $1,000 on morphine, but audiences noticed his rapid weight loss and gaunt features. He collapsed on set in October 1922 and was sent to a sanatorium where he was locked in a padded cell as he tried to detox. He died of influenza on January 19, 1923, and his death was a huge shock to the public, the first celebrity drug death. I mean, Oscar Pistorius was a pretty sharp fall from Paralympian champion, role model to spouse murderer. Chris Benoit. World-famous and beloved wrestler who committed a double homicide, son and wife, suicide. John Belushi. In a brief period in the 1970s starred as SNL, Animal House and the Blues Brothers, but died in 1982 from a heroin overdose. Jared Fogle. The subway guy. The things discovered about him are quite disturbing. Prison is an appropriate place for him. Jan Michael Vincent of Airwolf fame. His alcohol and drug abuse ruined a promising career and turned him into walking mummy towards the end. *edit*, all the, whoa, this guy was real, comments made me feel really old. Chris Brown in an alternate universe where there are consequences for your actions. Chris Benoit. I may not be a wrestling fan anymore, but damn what a tragedy. T.J. Miller called a bomb threat on a train he was on when he was rejected by someone he was trying to flirt with. Gia Karange. She started modeling in 1978 at age 18, reached her peak in 1979 and was considered the supermodel. But by 1980 her career was already in steep decline due to her hardcore drug addiction alongside her erratic personality making her difficultly to work with. By 1981 her career was basically over at only age 21. She tried to make multiple comebacks but it never stuck and officially left the modeling industry for good in 1983. She ended up working as a stall clerk and even a prostitute for some time, but in 1986 she ended up dying of AIDS at age 26, suspected to be caused by contaminated heroin needles. She was in such poor condition when she died, then when the doctors picked her up the skin fell off her back. No one in the fashion industry attended her funeral or even knew she had died. She fell just as quickly as she rose. In the end, no one she thought cared about her in New York ended up being there for her during her final months except for the friends she made in rehab. Though through the demise of Gia brought about the rise of Cindy Crawford. Cindy and Gia share a lot of resemblance, so many photographers would use her in place of Gia because she was far easier to work with. She was even nicknamed Baby Gia at the beginning of her career. Mason Greenwood went from being effectively the top young prospect at Man United to never touching a professional football field again. Fuck him edit. For those who don't know, Mason Greenwood was a young homegrown prospect for one of the biggest football teams in the world, being heralded as the next great for the team. That is, until one night his girlfriend came out with dozens of pictures, videos, texts and audio files of Mason being an abusive monster. He's done. Ian Watkins went from frontman of a world-famous rock band to doing 30 years for child sex offenses. Someone who was born into one of the most famous families in the world, so would have anything he wanted. What he wanted was just that little bit too far. No sweating it. Come on down, Prince Andrew. The child actors seem to me the saddest. Must be really hard to face the fact that the most famous, successful you will ever be is when you are 12. Mark Solling. The guy who played Puck in Glee. Maybe not the biggest star, but he was a fan favorite on a huge show. Got caught with child pornography, pleaded guilty, then hung himself. That's a pretty hard downward spiral. Tila Tequila going from bisexual reality TV vixen to Nazi was pretty astonishing. Armie Hammer. And apparently Ezra Miller is just batshit. I think of Chris Farley. His SNL career started in '92. His real break came with Tommy Boy in '94. Dead by 98 at 33 years old. Horribly addicted to drugs, alcohol, food, and other impulse-related stuff probably. Probably gained 100 pounds in his 6-year run. Odded on a speedball, as everyone seems to. Everybody of that era claims he was the funniest guy they've ever known. And most of them talk about being frustrated both by his lack of any self-worth, despite how beloved he was, and a feeling of inevitability about his early demise. Obviously Chris wasn't destructive like some of the other scumbags mentioned on this thing. He was simply self-destructive. People like to compare him to John Belushi. They had pretty much the same self-destructive trajectories, both fat dudes, both highly energetic performers. But as people I think they were very different. I think he's more comparable to Robin Williams. They both had this insatiable need to make people laugh, and they both had this superhuman energy. By all accounts Chris, like Robin, was an incredibly sweet and sensitive person in private life. Apparently he'd spend a lot of time volunteering at children's hospitals in Madison, Wisconsin, and he didn't even talk about it. I've heard a million takes on Farley, and it's always heartbreaking, and telling that 25 years later, people still talk about it and can't get over it. It's so heartbreaking that someone with so much potential and talent could be taken from us so soon. I guess we should all be a bit more careful with how we live our lives, and try not to end up like Chris Farley. His legacy will live on though, and his performances will continue to bring joy to people for years to come. Ezra Miller is doing a speed run on this ATM. Alison Mack this link. Kevin Spacey getting revealed to be a predator, using his sexuality as an excuse, getting fired from his projects and then posting an insane supervillain-level YouTube video is Frank Underwood basically blaming the viewers for being complicit. Roseanne did one of the fastest disappearing act that I can think of. Has everyone forgotten Charlie Sheen? Did hashtag winning stop winning? What about Tiger Blood and a bevy of porn stars? He went down so hard they made a series vaguely based on it and cast him in the lead role. Amanda Bynes. I remember watching She's the Man and thinking, wow, she's one of the few child actors who avoided the crazy spiral. I could not have been more wrong. He's not exactly a list anymore, but Andy Dick has had one of the worst downward spirals I can think of. He is a pretty terrible, toxic person, so it's difficult to feel bad for him, but in the last few years he's become heavily involved in the IRL streaming community IP2, this link which is honestly a collection of the trashiest people in America. Andy is passed around between different IRL content creators as he brings them views and they supply him with drugs and he provides content with his crazy behavior. He has had several pretty, nasty beatings, this link, and was once held against his will by a creator called Whoppy, who was abusive. Andy is basically a drug-addicted husk of a human. I felt like I needed a shower after watching some of the videos. That whole lifestyle is my idea of hell, but Andy recently was caught on stream sexually assaulting one of the IRL streamers, so it's basically impossible to feel sorry for him. Jussie Smollett. This link. Everyone is mentioning modern celebrities and forgetting historical standards. In all honesty, it's got to be John Wilkes Booth. The man was from a prestigious acting family and not only famous from his own skill and roles on stage, but became seriously wealthy too, and was in demand across the country. People knew him. He was 26 years old and a goddamn superstar. But he had sympathies with the Confederacy and planned to kidnap Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, with the help of conspirators to end the war more favorably. When they surrendered, he was enraged, changed the plan to kill Lincoln and several high-ranking officials with the help of his conspirators, and make the South rise up and welcome him as a hero. And then he killed Lincoln. This wonderkind acting behemoth, barely past his mid-20s, with a famous family and a huge amount of prestige and wealth to his name, killed the President of the United States in the pursuit of a delusional belief that he could change the outcome of an already decided war. He not only dissolved his own reputation in an instant, as both the Union and the former Confederate states were left utterly horrified by his act, but was killed within 2 weeks of an extensive manhunt and took several hours to die a painful, humiliating death. And on top of that, he removed a great reformer who could have positively rebuilt the former Confederate states and help eliminate the institutions left over, having him replaced with a more neutral leader who disagreed with the idea of Reconstruction and ended it prematurely, setting back the redevelopment of the South while also causing it to severely regress to such an extent that it still isn't fully resolved from the Civil War nearly 2 centuries later. That, friends, is the fastest, hardest and most destructive downward spiral of a celebrity from their peak. Wow, John Wilkes Booth was an incredible person, with immense talent and potential, but his choices led him to a tragic end. But if he was alive today, he'd probably have a record-breaking number of followers on Instagram. We can still learn from his actions and be inspired by his talents, even though his story doesn't have the happiest ending. No one mentioned Stephen Collins from Seventh Heaven. Dude's a massive pedo and went on TV trying to blame addiction IARC. Shia LaBeouf went from popular actor to weirdo not one wanted to touch with a 10-foot touching pole pretty quick. Just do it. Bill Cosby. He was America's favorite dad, stand-up comic, had several very successful TV shows, spokesman at colleges. Then poof. He's just a dirty, creepy guy who spikes your drink so he can get some. Bam Margera for me. He looks horrible now, like his dad but worse. Wouldn't be surprised if I wake up one morning and he's dead. Amanda Bynes. Went from the girl next door cast in every teen movie to a conservatorship and addiction issues. Mike Tyson. He went from being arrested 38 times before he was 13 to heavyweight champion of the world and having made $685 million. To prison for 3 years for rape, and he is at $10 million now, but Robert Downey Jr. had a pretty destructive spell, incredible recovery though. The speed of Robert Downey Jr.'s fall is matched only by the speed of his phoenix rising from the ashes. Fastest, hardest, and most destructive, from his peak. Chris Benoit, no contest. The man was at the pinnacle of his career, and he was going to win his 3rd world championship on June 25, 2007. In the 3 days leading up to it, he tied up and murdered his wife, drugged and strangled his son to death, and committed suicide by hanging himself on his lap pull-down machine. IDK about worst, but it's one of the saddest because it really wasn't his fault. The kid who played Anakin in The Phantom Menace had quit acting because of media harassment, online harassment by fans who hated the prequels, and in-school bullying. Later he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, was charged with assault after having an episode, and a bunch of other stuff including things drug addiction to cope. I think he lives with his mom now and is finally recovering. Maybe not most destructive, but Mel Gibson fell hard. Guy went from being quite a beloved and pretty decent actor to a respected director, and then said some really hateful things about Jews in the back of a police car, among other things. Boom, no more career. Took nearly a decade for him to see success again, with Hacksaw Ridge. Edit. Reading my comment back, it reads a bit like I'm suggesting his career tanked specifically because of one isolated anti-Semitic incident. It was very much a straw that broke the camel's back situation, and he had been racist prior to that event, as well as abusive to his wife, or wives, and possibly a bit homophobic too. Ian Watkins from Lost Prophets, Ian David Carslake Watkins, born the 30th of July 1977, is a Welsh convicted sex offender and former singer, songwriter, and musician. He achieved prominence as the co-founder, lead vocalist, and lyricist of the rock band Lost Prophets. 2. In 2013, he was sentenced to 29 years of imprisonment for multiple sexual offenses, including the sexual assault of young children and babies. Will Smith went to winning the Oscar to be a meme in the same night. Anna Nicole Smith. Bombshell sex symbol, married into lots of money, inherited quickly lots of money. Died shortly after, having lost everything. Ezra Miller is on a pretty wild ride downwards right now. Johnny Lewis. Half-sack from Sons of Anarchy. His story and demise is crazy. Maybe not, from his peak, but Michael Richards comes to mind. Massive role as Kramer in one of the most popular TV sitcoms of all time, and then, yikes. Just no coming back from this link. Antonio Brown, NFL wide receiver. He was on track to be a lock for the Hall of Fame and one of the best receivers of all time. Then he went off the deep end. There's a theory that a specific helmet-to-helmet hit triggered it. His antics since then have included being cut for refusing to play with new, safer helmets because he wanted to use his old one, even painting it to try to slip it past people, missing part of the season because he damaged his feet trying experimental cryotherapy, arriving to training camp in a hot air balloon, and getting angry in the middle of a game last year, taking off his jersey and pads on the field, and sprinting to the locker room. A wholesome one, not very fast but pretty destructive. Brendan Fraser. Star of The Mummy then got destroyed by his stunts and his divorce and had to pay his wife like $900K per year or something, got addicted to alcohol IARC. He's rebounding pretty great so far. Really likable guy, and he gets more and more roles again. Edit. Forgot the stunts edit too, and the sexual abuse he experienced. Richard Gere, but for all the wrong reasons. Richard was peak celebrity and face of Hollywood at one point. He had the looks, charisma, chemistry and the acting chops, but suddenly his career just fell off. What was his mistake, you ask? Speaking up against illegal and immoral Chinese occupation of Tibet. This earned him a 10-year ban from Oscars, and due to China's massive influence on Hollywood he was essentially blacklisted. Britney Spears. She then proceeded to get royally fucked over by the courts and essentially became her father's slave until recently. I hope I'm not misinterpreting the question, but Aaron Carter, Lane Staley, Lindsay Lohan, Amanda Bynes, Charlie Sheen, a long list of pro wrestlers, and Jared from Subway. Amy Winehouse. I was a fan of hers right from 2003 when she first emerged, and I thought she was just brilliant. Sassy, brilliant attitude and a voice that would stop you in your tracks. I remember seeing her live in 2004 in a tiny club, and she wore a skin-tight orange lycra dress and had the crowd eating out of the palm of her hand. Watching her destruction throughout 2007 and 2008 was just horrible. It was like a car crash that no one could stop. I've never been able to watch the footage of her final concert in Belgrade, as she just looks terrified and with no control. The really sad thing is that in her final weeks, she looked like she was getting it together. She looked healthier than she had in such a long time. I've never been upset about a celebrity dying before, but I will say I shed a few tears when I saw the news about Amy. Tom Sizemore. He starred in so many movies including Saving Private Ryan and Black Hawk Down. He had a number of indiscretions brought on by substance abuse problems. Then he had that embarrassing role in Dr. Drew's Rehab or whatever. He was a great actor and one of my favorites. I wish he'd get his act together. Dana Plato. This link, Kimberly Drummond in Defron Strokes. Got pregnant during the last year of the show and took the classic spiral down the addiction road. Got caught robbing a store at gunpoint. Committed suicide at 34. I would say Anne Heche given what happened and her dying today. Sports celebrity, but Lance Armstrong had an incredible fall from grace. From multiple Tour de France champion to steroid denier, and finally admitted everything but too late. Lost everything and he couldn't even get sympathy when he went through testicular cancer. That's how bad his spiral was. Ezra Miller. Imagine going from being the lead in a hotly anticipated superhero movie to hiding out in a Vermont farmhouse with guns and a federal warrant on your head. Bill Cosby. Was once an inspiration to many comedians and presented as a wholesome person. If you liked the video, please consider subscribing and liking. Any feedback in the comments would be greatly appreciated so that we can make these videos even better. Thanks for watching Upvote Stories.